In a forgotten town, a quiet little girl struggling to survive found an old man collapsing in a dark alley. No one noticed. No one cared. So she took a desperate risk, handing the only money she had to the store clerk, begging for a 911 call before disappearing into the night. She never imagined that the man was the father of a billionaire. And the very next morning, a black SUV stopped in front of her hiding place, ready to take her to a luxurious mansion that would change everything. But that was only where the real story began. Before we continue, tell us what time it is and where you're watching from, subscribe and hype, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. Lambert, Virginia, wasn't the kind of town people talked about anymore. It was the kind of place you drove through on your way somewhere else if you were unlucky enough to take the wrong exit off Route 29. The train station sat empty, its platform cracked and weedy. The old lumber mill, once the heartbeat of the town, had closed 15 years ago. Its windows were boarded up now, covered in faded graffiti that nobody bothered to clean. Main Street looked like a mouth missing half its teeth, storefronts dark for lease signs gathering dust in the windows. The hardware store only opened 3 days a week. People still lived here, of course. They just didn't live with much hope. In this landscape of quiet surrender, Leah Harper was easy to miss. She was 6 years old, small for her age, with deep brown skin and natural hair she tried to keep tied back with whatever she could find: rubber bands from the post office floor, twist ties from bread bags, once even a shoelace she'd found near the basketball court. Her jacket came from the donation bin behind St. Rena's Church, so faded and worn you couldn't tell what color it used to be. Navy, maybe, or dark green. Her pants were too big, held up with a piece of rope. Her shoes didn't match. One was a blue sneaker with the sole peeling away, the other a canvas slip-on, dirty white, 2 sizes too large. When she walked, her shoes made different sounds: squeak, shuffle, squeak, shuffle. Nobody really knew where Leah slept. During the day she stayed close to familiar places: the concrete steps of St. Rena's, the covered area behind the old Hannaford grocery store, the bus stop that no buses serviced anymore. At night, she found shelter wherever she could: under the awning of the closed diner, in the stairwell behind the laundromat, once in the covered loading dock of the pharmacy when it rained for 3 days straight. People in Lambert knew her by sight. A town this small didn't have many secrets, but knowing someone exists and actually seeing them are two different things. "That's the quiet girl," Mrs. Chen at the post office would say, not unkindly, when someone asked. "Doesn't talk," Earl from the gas station added once. "Something wrong with her, I think." "Where's her people?" someone else would ask. A shrug. "Don't know. Not our business, I guess." Leah heard these conversations. She understood more than they thought, but her throat stayed locked, the way it had been since the day her mother left. The memories of that day were broken, scattered like puzzle pieces she'd given up trying to fit together. She remembered her mother's hand, thin, cold, gripping too tight. She remembered walking fast, almost running, her mother pulling her along Main Street toward the church. She remembered the inside of St. Rena's, the smell of old wood and candle wax, the way their footsteps echoed on the stone floor. She remembered Father Marcus Doyle standing near the altar, his white hair catching the colored light from the stained glass windows. Her mother had spoken to him in a low, urgent voice. Leah couldn't hear the words, but she heard the tone, desperate, fraying at the edges. Father Marcus had nodded slowly, his weathered face full of something Leah would later recognize as deep sadness. Then her mother had knelt down, eye level with Leah. She touched Leah's cheek once, just once, and said something. Leah couldn't remember the words now. Maybe she'd blocked them out. Maybe they'd hurt too much to keep. Then her mother had stood up, turned around, and walked out through the heavy wooden doors of the church. She didn't look back. She never came back. After that, Father Marcus was all Leah had. He gave her crackers and soup from the church kitchen. He let her sleep in the small storage room behind the sanctuary on nights when the temperature dropped below freezing. He called her by her full name, Amelia, even though everyone else just said Leah when they said anything at all. "Amelia is a strong name," he'd told her once, his voice soft and scratchy like old paper. "It means work. You're a worker child." A survivor. Leah didn't feel strong, but when Father Marcus said it, she almost believed him. As the seasons changed, Father Marcus grew slower. His hands shook when he lifted the communion chalice. His cough lasted longer. Some mornings, Leah would find him sitting in the front pew, not praying, just staring at the cross with tired eyes. One afternoon in late autumn, when the light came through the church windows at a low golden angle and the air smelled like dust and old hymnals, Father Marcus called Leah over to where he sat in his usual pew. "Come here, child," he said, patting the worn wooden seat beside him. Leah climbed up and sat, her feet not quite reaching the floor. Father Marcus opened the small leather-bound notebook he always carried, the one where he kept his sermon notes and prayer requests. From between the pages, he pulled out a plain white envelope, slightly yellowed at the edges. He placed it in Leah's hands. It was lighter than she expected. "Amelia," he said, his blue eyes meeting hers, serious and clear. "There's $100 bill inside this envelope." Leah's eyes widened. She'd never held that much money in her life. "Now listen to me carefully." Father Marcus covered her small hands with both of his, old hands spotted with age, the knuckles swollen. "The world out there, it's not always kind. It's going to make you cold. It's going to make you hungry. There will be nights when you don't know where you'll sleep, or when you'll eat next." Leah's chest tightened, but this, he tapped the envelope gently. "This is for you. Do you understand? This is for when things get really bad, when you need food, or medicine, or a safe place. This is for keeping yourself safe." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Don't spend it unless you absolutely have to. And when you do spend it, you spend it on you. Not on anyone else, not even if they ask, not even if you want to help. Your life matters, Amelia, your safety matters. Promise me you'll remember that." Leah looked down at the envelope, then back up at Father Marcus. She couldn't speak. Her voice had been locked away for so long she wasn't sure it even existed anymore. But she nodded, slow and solemn, like she was making a sacred vow. "Good girl." Father Marcus squeezed her hands one more time, then let go. 3 weeks later, Father Marcus didn't wake up. Mrs. Kaplan, who cleaned the church every Tuesday and Thursday, found him in his small bedroom behind the office. He died in his sleep, the doctor said. His heart had finally given out. Peaceful, no pain. Leah stood outside the church the day they took his body away. She watched the ambulance pull away. No sirens this time, no rush, and felt something inside her crack wider. She still had the envelope. She'd kept it tucked in the bottom of her cloth bag, wrapped in an old piece of newspaper to keep it safe. After Father Marcus was gone, the new minister, a younger man named Pastor Greg, who smiled too much and didn't know anyone's name yet, tried to talk to her a few times. "Hey there, sweetie, you doing okay?" Leah just looked at him and walked away. Nobody pushed, nobody followed, and just like that, Leah became completely invisible. Everything she owned fit inside a pillowcase she'd sewn into a bag using a needle and thread she'd found in the church donation box. Inside were a small toy car, red plastic, missing one wheel, a doll with brown skin and curly hair like hers, missing its left arm, a yellow plastic spoon, the edge chipped and rough, and the envelope, folded carefully, always at the very bottom, where no one could see. There were days when hunger clawed at her stomach so hard she felt dizzy. On those days, she'd sit somewhere hidden, behind the dumpster at the grocery store, under the broken slide at the playground, and she'd open her bag. She'd take out the envelope, and just hold it, feeling the slight thickness of the bill inside. She never opened it, she never spent it, because Father Marcus had told her, "This is for you, for keeping yourself safe," and right now, she was still surviving. Barely. But surviving. That evening, a Tuesday in early November, the cold came down hard and early. By 4 o'clock, the sun was already sinking, turning the sky a bruised purple-gray. The wind picked up, cutting down Main Street like a blade, slicing through Leah's thin jacket and the 2 layers of shirts underneath. She hugged her pillowcase bag, tight against her chest, and walked quickly toward the alley behind Lambert Pharmacy, her usual spot. The pharmacy's back wall blocked most of the wind, and if she curled up small in the corner near the dumpster, she could stay relatively warm through the night. Her stomach hurt. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, when Pastor Greg's wife had left a paper bag of day-old bagels on the church steps, but she'd make it through. She always did. Leah turned into the alley, her mismatched shoes scraping against the wet pavement, and stopped. There was someone else there. The alley was narrow, barely wide enough for a car, and boxed in on both sides by old brick buildings. The walls were stained dark with years of rain and grime. At the far end, maybe 40 feet away, a single streetlight threw weak yellow light that didn't quite reach where Leah stood. The ground was always damp here, even when it hadn't rained. The pavement was cracked and uneven. It smelled like motor oil and rotting cardboard and something sour Leah couldn't name. She knew this alley better than most people knew their own bedrooms, but tonight, something was different. A man lay crumpled against the far wall, half in shadow, half in the sick yellow glow of the distant streetlight. He wasn't sleeping. Leah could tell that right away. He was old, maybe 70, maybe older, with white hair that stuck up in wild angles. His face was the color of ash. His mouth hung open slightly, lips pale and dry. One hand clutched at his chest, fingers digging into the fabric of his coat, like he was trying to hold something inside from breaking out. His other hand was on the ground beside him, fingers twitching, scraping weakly at the pavement. His breathing was all wrong, fast and shallow and uneven, like a machine struggling to keep running. Help, the word came out barely louder than the wind. Please, someone. Leah's feet wouldn't move. She'd seen people on the streets before. Plenty of them. Men and women curled up under blankets, smelling like alcohol and sweat. People shouting at things that weren't there. People who ignored her just as much as she ignored them. But this was different. This man wasn't drunk, he wasn't high, he was dying. She could see it in the way his chest jerked unevenly with each breath, in the way his eyes rolled, glassy and unfocused, searching for something to anchor to, in the way his fingers kept clawing at the ground, like he was trying to pull himself up but couldn't remember how. Leah's heart pounded. She took one step forward, then another. The man's eyes moved, catching on her small silhouette. For just a second they cleared. He saw her, really saw her, and in that look was every desperate, drowning thing a person feels when they know they're running out of time. Help, he whispered again, the word cracking apart in his throat. Leah's hands were shaking. She looked around the alley at the dumpster, the broken bottles scattered near the wall, the plastic bags lifting and falling in the wind. No one else was here, just her, and him. Her throat felt tight. She wanted to call out, to scream for help, but her voice had been locked away for so long it felt like trying to open a rusted door. Instead she moved closer, her breath coming quick and shallow. When she was a few feet away, she could hear the wet rattle in his chest, could see the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold, could smell something sharp and medicinal, like the inside of the pharmacy. She didn't know what a heart attack looked like, but she knew what dying looked like. She'd seen it once before, in Father Marcus's face the week before he passed, that faraway look, like part of him was already somewhere else. Leah knelt down on the cold pavement, her knees pressing into a shallow puddle. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the last thing she had, half a piece of bread, wrapped in a napkin. She'd saved it from this morning, planning to eat it before bed. She unwrapped it carefully and held it out to the man, placing it gently in his trembling palm. He looked down at it, tried to focus, then he shook his head, barely, just a tiny movement, and his hand fell limp, the bread tumbling onto the wet ground. His throat worked, but nothing went down. He couldn't eat, he couldn't even swallow. Leah stared at his hand. The skin was thin, almost translucent, with thick blue veins standing out like rivers on a map. His fingers twitched again, curling inward, then relaxing. She didn't need anyone to tell her. If no one came right now, this man was going to die here, alone, in the dark, in this forgotten alley where nobody ever came. The wind picked up, colder now, carrying the smell of coming rain. Leah's hand moved to her pillowcase bag. She felt the outline of the envelope through the fabric. Father Marcus's voice echoed in her head, as clear as if he were standing right behind her, his hand on her shoulder. "This is for you, Amelia, for keeping yourself safe." The man's breathing grew more ragged, his eyes fluttered shut, his hand stopped moving. Leah bit her lip so hard she tasted copper. She pulled the envelope out of her bag. For a long moment, she just held it, feeling its weight, the weight of every meal she hadn't eaten, every cold night she'd survived, every time she'd been hungry and scared and alone. This was all she had, the only safety net she'd ever known. But when she looked at the man's face, gray and slack, his chest barely moving, she knew. She knew what Father Marcus would have done. She knew what should be done, even if it wasn't what he'd told her to do. Leah stood up. She shoved the envelope deep into her jacket pocket, turned and ran. Her mismatched shoes slapped hard against the wet pavement, squeak shuffle, echoing off the brick walls as she sprinted out of the alley and toward the bright windows of Lambert Pharmacy. Behind her, the man's breathing grew fainter, but Leah didn't look back. She just ran. The bell above the pharmacy door jangled loud and sharp when Leah slammed through it. Inside, the lights were fluorescent bright, almost blinding after the dimness of the alley. The air was warm and smelled like medicine and plastic, and the faint floral scent of cheap air freshener. Rows of shelves stretched toward the back, bandages, vitamins, cough syrup, reading glasses on little rotating displays. Behind the front counter, Hazel Green looked up from her crossword puzzle, annoyed at the interruption. Hazel was in her mid-50s, heavy-set, with short gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses that sat crooked on her nose. She'd worked at Lambert Pharmacy for 23 years and had seen just about everything this town had to offer, which wasn't much. She recognized the kid immediately. The quiet one. The one who hung around but never bought anything. "We don't give out free candy," Hazel said flatly, not even putting down her pen. "And we're closing in 20 minutes, so whatever you want, make it quick or come back tomorrow." Leah ran up to the counter, breathing hard. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her throat closed up, the way it always did. She tried again, forcing air through her vocal cords, but all that came out was a thin, broken sound, something between a gasp and a whimper. Hazel frowned. "What's wrong with you? You sick?" Leah shook her head frantically and pointed toward the door, toward the alley outside, her whole arm shaking. "I don't know what you're trying to tell me, kid." Hazel's voice was sharp with impatience. "I don't have time for charades. If you're not buying something, you need to leave." Panic surged through Leah's chest. He was dying, right now, and no one understood. Her hand dove into her jacket pocket, fingers closing around the envelope. She pulled it out, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She tore it open, not carefully this time, not reverently, and pulled out the $100 bill inside. The paper was soft, worn smooth from years of being folded and unfolded. The ink was still bright green. Benjamin Franklin's face stared up at her, solemn and unreadable. Leah held it up with both hands, arms stretched high over her head like she was surrendering, like she was offering up the only valuable thing she'd ever owned. The overhead lights caught the bill, making it almost glow. Hazel's eyes went wide. "Jesus Christ," she breathed, setting down her pen. "Where the hell did you get that?" Leah didn't answer, couldn't answer. She just slammed the bill down on the counter, and pointed again, harder this time, her finger jabbing toward the door, her eyes wide and desperate and shining with unshed tears. "Please," her expression said. "Please understand." Hazel stared at the money, then at Leah, then back at the money. Something clicked. "Is someone hurt?" Hazel asked, her voice changing, losing its edge. "Out there? In the alley?" Leah nodded so hard her whole body moved. "Shit." Hazel grabbed the phone on the counter and punched in 3 numbers. 911, "What's your emergency?" Leah heard the tinny voice on the other end. "Yeah, hi, this is Hazel Green at Lambert Pharmacy on Main Street. I need an ambulance. There's someone collapsed in the alley behind my store. I think it's serious." A pause. "No, I haven't seen them myself. A kid just came in. Yeah, she's here now. She can't talk, but she's look, just send someone." "Okay." "Alley behind 47 Main Street. Yeah, hurry." Hazel hung up and looked at Leah, but Leah was already gone. The bell jangled again as the door swung shut. Hazel looked down at the $100 bill still sitting on her counter, then out the window at the small figure running back into the shadows. "Damn," she muttered. Leah ran back to the alley, her lungs burning, her legs aching. When she rounded the corner, the man was still there, still breathing, but barely. She dropped to her knees beside him, not caring about the cold water soaking through her pants. "They're coming," she whispered, even though he probably couldn't hear her. "Help is coming." The man's eyes opened slightly, just slits, and moved toward her voice. His lips moved, forming a word, but no sound came out. Leah reached out and took his hand. It was cold. So cold, she held it between both of hers, trying to warm it, her small fingers wrapping around his larger ones. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're not alone." In the distance a siren started wailing, faint at first, then louder, closer. Red and blue lights began to flicker against the brick walls. The ambulance pulled up to the mouth of the alley, its headlights flooding the narrow space with harsh white light. 2 paramedics jumped out, moving fast, carrying bags and equipment. "Over here," one of them called. They rushed past Leah without seeming to see her. She let go of the man's hand and scooted backward, pressing herself against the dumpster, making herself small, invisible, the way she'd always been. The paramedics knelt beside the man, checking his pulse, his breathing, shining a light in his eyes. "Pulse is weak, respiration's shallow, possible, MI. Let's get him loaded." They moved quickly, efficiently, lifting him onto a stretcher, strapping him down, covering him with a blanket. As they wheeled him toward the ambulance, the man's eyes opened again. He turned his head slightly, searching the shadows, looking for her. But Leah stayed hidden. The ambulance doors slammed shut. The siren wailed again, piercing and urgent. The vehicle pulled away, its taillights disappearing around the corner, and then the alley was empty again. Silent. Leah stayed crouched behind the dumpster for a long time, hugging her pillowcase bag, lighter now, emptier, against her chest. Her stomach still hurt from hunger, her hands were still freezing, but somewhere underneath all that cold and pain, there was something else, something small and warm, the knowledge that the man wouldn't die alone in the dark. She looked down at her bag. The envelope was gone, the $100 was gone. Father Marcus's last gift to her, gone. She'd broken her promise, but somehow, she didn't feel guilty, she felt right. Leah stood up slowly, her legs stiff, and looked up at the narrow strip of sky, visible between the buildings. It was fully dark now, stars were starting to appear. If Father Marcus were still alive, she wondered what he'd say. "Maybe you were supposed to use that for yourself, Amelia. Or maybe you did exactly what you were meant to do." She'd never know. Leah pulled her jacket tighter around herself, and walked deeper into the alley, back to her usual corner, where she curled up small and tried to sleep. Tomorrow she'd be hungry again. Tomorrow she'd have nothing again. But tonight, someone was alive because of her, and maybe that was enough. Arthur Whitlock woke to whiteness, white ceiling, white walls, white sheets tucked tight around him. The smell of disinfectant, and something metallic underneath. He blinked, trying to clear the fog from his mind. Where was he? His chest ached, a deep, bruised ache that spread from his sternum outward. His left arm felt heavy. When he tried to move it, he felt the tug of an IV line. Memory came back in pieces, the alley, the crushing pain in his chest, the fear, real, primal fear, of dying alone in the dark. And then, something else, a shadow. Small. Mr. Whitlock. A nurse appeared at his bedside, young with dark hair pulled into a ponytail. She smiled, relieved. "Welcome back. You gave us quite a scare." Arthur's throat was dry as sand. "Where?" "Lambert Regional Hospital. You had a heart attack. A serious one. You're lucky to be alive." "Lucky?" Arthur closed his eyes. "How did I?" He swallowed, trying to form the question. "How did I get here?" The nurse checked something on the monitor beside his bed. "Ambulance brought you in last night around 7 p.m. The 911 call came from Lambert Pharmacy." "Who called?" The nurse glanced at his chart. "Doesn't say, just says caller from pharmacy." That's all the dispatcher logged. Arthur stared at the ceiling, trying to piece together the gaps in his memory. He remembered pain. He remembered cold. He remembered thinking, "This is it. This is how it ends." And then a face, small, young, dark eyes, wide with fear, tiny hands holding something up. Had that been real? Or just his oxygen-starved brain, conjuring hallucinations as it shut down? The door opened. "Dad." Lucas Whitlock strode into the room, his face pale, his tie loosened, his usually perfect hair disheveled. He looked like he'd been awake for 2 days straight. He stopped at the foot of the bed, gripping the rail, his knuckles white. "Dad," he said again, and his voice cracked. Arthur managed a weak smile. "I'm still here, son." Lucas exhaled shakily and moved to the side of the bed, sinking into the chair like his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. "The doctor said." Lucas stopped, cleared his throat. "He said if the ambulance had been even 10 minutes later, you wouldn't have made it." Arthur reached out his hand, the one without the IV. Lucas took it immediately, gripping tight. "Someone called," Arthur said slowly. "Someone found me." "The pharmacy," Lucas said. "That's all we know." "No." Arthur shook his head slightly. "Before that, before the ambulance, there was someone there." Lucas frowned. "Dad, you were unconscious when the paramedics arrived." "Before that," Arthur insisted. His voice was weak, but certain. "I wasn't alone. There was a child, a little girl, a girl. Small, young." Arthur closed his eyes, trying to pull the memory into focus. "She tried to help me. I remember she gave me something. Food maybe. Bread." He opened his eyes, looking at his son, "And then she ran. She ran to get help." Lucas was quiet for a long moment. "Dad, you were in bad shape. Your brain wasn't getting enough oxygen. Sometimes people see things." "I saw her," Arthur said firmly. "Lucas, I know what I saw. She was real, and she saved my life." Lucas studied his father's face. Arthur Whitlock was a lot of things: stubborn, proud, sometimes too independent for his own good, but he wasn't a man who confused reality with imagination. "Okay," Lucas said finally. "Okay, so there was a girl. We have to find her." "Dad, we have to find her." "Lucas." Arthur's grip tightened. "She didn't have anything. I could see that. Her clothes, her shoes, she had nothing. And she still," his voice broke, "she still helped me." Lucas looked down at their joined hands. He was a practical man, a businessman. He dealt in numbers and contracts and measurable outcomes, but he'd almost lost his father last night, and if his father said some nameless kid in an alley had saved his life, then maybe, just maybe, they owed it to both of them to find out who she was. "All right," Lucas said quietly. "We'll find her." Arthur closed his eyes, exhausted but relieved. "Thank you." 2 days later, against his doctor's strong objections, Arthur checked himself out of the hospital. "You need rest," Dr. Patel had insisted. "At least a week of monitoring." "I'll rest when I'm dead." Arthur shot back. "Which I would be, if not for that girl. So I'm going to find her." Lucas drove them back to Lambert in his black Mercedes. Their first stop was Lambert Pharmacy. The bell above the door rang when they entered. Hazel Green looked up from behind the counter, her expression shifting from boredom to surprise, when she saw Arthur, pale, leaning heavily on a cane, but alive, and Lucas in his expensive coat. "Can I help you?" Hazel asked cautiously. Lucas stepped forward. "I'm Lucas Whitlock. This is my father, Arthur. You called 911 for him 2 nights ago." Recognition flickered across Hazel's face. "Oh yeah, that was. How are you feeling?" "Alive," Arthur said. "Thanks to whoever made that call." "That'd be me," Hazel said. "But you weren't the one who found him," Lucas said. "Were you?" Hazel hesitated, then shook her head. "No, a kid came in, couldn't talk, or wouldn't, I don't know. She just kept pointing outside, seemed real upset. Then she..." Hazel paused. "She put down a $100 bill on my counter. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong." Arthur leaned forward on his cane. "This girl, do you know her name?" "Laya," Hazel said. "That's what I've heard people call her. Don't know her last name. She's one of the, well, she doesn't really have a home, if you know what I mean." "Homeless," Lucas said quietly. Hazel nodded. "Mostly hangs around St. Rena's, sometimes the old market. She's real quiet, never makes trouble." "Do you have security cameras?" Lucas asked. Hazel hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, out front." "Can we see the footage from that night?" 5 minutes later they were crowded around Hazel's small back office watching grainy black and white footage on an old monitor. The timestamp read 6:47 p.m. The pharmacy door opened, and there she was. A small figure in an oversized jacket, hair in messy curls. Shoes that didn't match. She moved jerkily, frantically, running up to the counter. Even in the low-quality video, Arthur could see the desperation on her face. She held up the bill, both hands, arms stretched high like she was offering up everything she had. Which, Arthur realized with a cold weight in his chest, she probably was. Hazel took the phone. Made the call. The girl turned and ran back out. The whole thing lasted less than a minute. Arthur reached out and touched the monitor screen, his finger hovering over the frozen image of the girl's face. "That's her," he whispered. "That's the one who saved me." Lucas stared at the screen. The girl couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. And she'd used what was probably her life savings to save a stranger. "We need to find her," Arthur said again, his voice rough. Lucas nodded slowly. "Yeah, Dad, we do." They spent the rest of the day searching. St. Rena's Church was their next stop. Pastor Greg, a young guy with an earnest face and a tendency to talk too much, confirmed that yes, he knew Leia sort of, but no, he didn't know where she stayed. "She comes by sometimes for food," he said, "but she doesn't stick around. Father Marcus used to look after her before he passed. Since then," he shrugged helplessly, "we try, but she's like smoke, you can't hold on to her." They asked at the old market, the gas station, the coffee shop. Everyone knew her by sight. No one knew where to find her. By evening the sky had turned the color of slate. The temperature dropped. Arthur sat down heavily on a bench in the town square, exhausted. Lucas sat beside him. "Dad, we should go home, get some rest. We can try again tomorrow." Arthur stared out at Main Street, empty except for a few cars, a couple walking a dog, the lights in the windows starting to glow warm against the coming dark. "That night," Arthur said quietly, "she didn't leave me alone in the dark." He turned to look at his son. "How can I leave her out here now when it's getting dark?" Lucas didn't have an answer for that. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Lucas stood. "Come on," he said. "One more place." By the time they reached St. Rena's again, the rain had started. Light at first, just a few drops hitting the windshield, but within minutes it picked up, turning into a steady downpour that drummed against the roof of Lucas's car. "They do a soup kitchen on Tuesday nights," Lucas said, pulling into the church parking lot. "Pastor Greg mentioned it. If she comes by for food, maybe." He didn't finish the sentence. They got out of the car. Lucas opened an umbrella. Arthur waved it away and pulled up the collar of his coat, letting the rain soak into his hair. The church hall was lit from within, warm light spilling out through the windows. They could see shapes moving inside, people lined up, volunteers serving food from big metal pots. Arthur and Lucas stood under the overhang by the side door, out of the worst of the rain, watching. The line moved slowly. One person, then another, stepping up to receive a bowl of soup, a piece of bread, maybe an apple or a cookie. Men with weathered faces, women with tired eyes, a few teenagers, an elderly couple holding hands. And then Arthur's breath caught. A small figure near the back of the line. Faded blue jacket. White bag clutched to her chest. Mismatched shoes, soaked through, leaving wet prints on the floor. "Leah," Arthur breathed. Lucas followed his father's gaze and saw her too. She looked even smaller than she had on the video. More fragile. Like a strong wind could blow her away. They watched as she reached the front of the line. A volunteer, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, checked a clipboard, then looked apologetic. "I'm sorry, honey. You're not on today's list. We have limited portions tonight," and she glanced at the nearly empty pot. "I'm afraid we're all out." Leah stood very still, then she nodded, just once, a tiny movement, and stepped out of line. She turned toward the door, hugging her bag tighter. Arthur moved before Lucas could stop him. He stepped forward, leaning on his cane, and called out, "Wait." Leah froze. She turned slowly. When her eyes met Arthur's, recognition flashed across her face like lightning. The man from the alley. Arthur walked toward her, moving carefully on the slick floor, until he was a few feet away. Up close, he could see how thin she was, how her jacket hung off her shoulders, how her hands were red and chapped from the cold. He lowered himself slowly, painfully, down to one knee so they were at eye level. "You're Leah," he said softly. Leah didn't answer, but her eyes widened slightly. "My name is Arthur." He placed one hand over his heart. "You saved my life." Leah's lips pressed together. She looked down at her wet shoes. "I can't pay you back for what you did," Arthur continued. His voice was steady, but his eyes were wet, and not from the rain. That $100 you gave, I don't have a way to replace that. He paused, but if you'll let me, I'd like to give you something else. A home, a warm bed, a place where you don't have to wait in line for food anymore. The church hall had gone quiet. People were watching now, the volunteers, the other folks in line, Pastor Greg standing in the doorway of the kitchen. Leah looked up at Arthur. She'd spent so long being invisible, being overlooked, being forgotten. And now this man, this stranger whose life she'd saved, was kneeling in front of her, in front of everyone, offering her the one thing she'd never had, a home. Lucas stepped forward, umbrella in hand, and looked down at Leah with a gentle expression. "Hi Leah," he said. "I'm Lucas, Arthur's son." He crouched down too. "If you want you can call me Uncle Lucas, and if you come with us, we'll take care of you. I promise." Leah's hands tightened on her bag. She looked at Arthur, then at Lucas, then at Pastor Greg, who gave her a small encouraging nod. Slowly, so slowly, Leah reached out one small hand and touched the edge of Arthur's coat sleeve. Not a handshake, not a hug, just a touch. A single fingertip against worn fabric, but it was enough. Arthur's face broke into a smile, tears spilling over. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, sweetheart. Let's get you out of the rain." He stood up with Lucas's help, and together they walked toward the door. Leah followed, her wet shoes squeaking on the floor. At the doorway, Pastor Greg stopped them briefly. He placed a hand on Leah's shoulder. "You go on, Leah," he said gently. "You've been with us long enough. It's time you had a real home." Leah looked up at him. For the first time in a long time, her lips curved into the smallest hint of a smile. Outside the rain was still falling hard. Lucas held the umbrella over Leah as they walked to the car. Arthur got in the front. Lucas opened the back door for Leah, and she climbed in, clutching her pillowcase bag in her lap. As Lucas started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, Leah pressed her face to the window and watched St. Reina's disappear behind them. She didn't know where she was going, but for the first time since her mother left, she wasn't alone. And that was enough. The Whitlock house sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by trees. Through the branches, Leah could see the dark shimmer of water, the lake Arthur had mentioned. The house itself was 2 stories, painted white with dark green shutters. A porch wrapped around the front, with 2 rocking chairs, and a wooden swing. Warm light glowed in the windows. It looked like the kind of house Leah had seen in storybooks at the church library. The kind where families lived. The kind she never thought she'd see from the inside. Lucas parked the car, and came around to open Leah's door. She stepped out onto the gravel, still holding her bag, and looked up at the house with wide eyes. "Come on," Arthur said gently. "Let's get you inside where it's warm." The front door wasn't locked. Arthur pushed it open and gestured for Leah to enter first. She stepped over the threshold. Inside the house smelled like wood and old books, and something baking, maybe bread. The entryway opened into a living room with hardwood floors, a worn but comfortable-looking sofa, a fireplace with framed photos on the mantel. It was the warmest place Leah had been in years. Lucas shrugged off his wet coat and hung it on a hook by the door. "You must be freezing. Let me show you your room, and you can get into some dry clothes." Your room. The words felt impossible. Leah followed Lucas up a narrow staircase, her wet shoes leaving prints on the wood. At the top of the stairs, Lucas turned down a hallway and stopped at the second door on the left. He opened it. "This is yours," he said simply. Leah stood in the doorway, unable to move. The room was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, but it was more than she'd ever imagined. A bed with an actual mattress, made up with clean white sheets, and a thick blue quilt folded at the foot. A small wooden desk by the window, a bookshelf empty for now, waiting. A lamp on the nightstand with a soft yellow shade, and on the pillow, a teddy bear. Brown, soft-looking, with black button eyes and a small red ribbon around its neck. Leah took one step into the room, then another. She reached out slowly and touched the quilt. The fabric was soft under her fingers, clean and dry. "It's not much," Lucas said from the doorway, "but it's yours. No one else's. You can close the door whenever you want privacy. This is your space." Leah turned to look at him, her expression caught between disbelief and something that might have been hope. "There's a bathroom right across the hall," Lucas continued. Towels are in the cabinet. If you want to take a shower and warm up, feel free. I'll see if we have any clothes that might fit you for now. Tomorrow we can go get you some new things. He smiled. Take your time, okay? Come downstairs when you're ready. He stepped back and closed the door gently, leaving Leah alone. She stood in the middle of the room for a long time, just looking. At the bed, the desk, the bear. At the window with its view of dark trees and the lake beyond. She'd slept in alleys and under awnings and in stairwells. She'd learned to curl up small, to stay quiet, to take up as little space as possible. And now she had a whole room. Her throat felt tight. She set her pillowcase bag on the desk and opened it carefully. One by one she pulled out her treasures and arranged them on the desk's surface. The toy car with the missing wheel, the one-armed doll, the chipped yellow spoon. She touched each one, like greeting old friends. The envelope was gone. The $100 was gone. But somehow, looking at these small broken things, Leah didn't feel sad. She turned and picked up the teddy bear from the bed. It was heavier than she expected, stuffed firm. The fur was soft against her cheek. She held it close and sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress gave slightly under her weight, soft, supportive, so different from concrete. Leah lay down slowly, still holding the bear, and stared up at the ceiling. From somewhere downstairs, she heard the low murmur of voices, Arthur and Lucas talking. The sound of footsteps, a door closing softly. Normal sounds, household sounds, sounds that meant people nearby, people who wanted her there. The next morning, Leah woke to sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment she panicked. Where was she? Was she safe? Had someone found her? Then she remembered. She sat up slowly, still wearing the dry clothes Lucas had left outside her door last night, sweatpants and a t-shirt, both way too big, but clean and warm. The house was quiet. Leah slipped out of bed and padded to the window in her bare feet. Outside, the lake was calm, reflecting the morning sky like a mirror. Trees circled the water, their leaves bright with autumn color, red and gold and orange. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Downstairs, she found Arthur sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee and reading a newspaper. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. "Good morning, Leah," he said with a smile. "Did you sleep okay?" Leah nodded. "Hungry?" Another nod. Arthur stood up, slower than he used to, Leah could tell, still recovering, and moved to the stove. "How about some scrambled eggs and toast?" Leah's stomach twisted with hunger at the mention of food, but she didn't want to be a burden. She opened her mouth, trying to find words, but they tangled in her throat. Arthur seemed to understand. "It's okay, you don't have to talk if you don't want to. Just sit down and I'll get you some breakfast." Leah sat at the table, her feet dangling above the floor. Arthur moved around the kitchen, cracking eggs into a bowl, dropping bread into the toaster. He hummed softly while he cooked, an old tune Leah didn't recognize. A few minutes later, he set a plate in front of her, fluffy scrambled eggs, 2 pieces of buttered toast, and a glass of orange juice. It smelled like heaven. "Go on," Arthur said gently. "Eat." Leah picked up her fork. Her hand shook slightly as she took the first bite. The eggs were warm and soft, and tasted better than anything she could remember. She ate slowly, carefully, like the food might disappear if she wasn't paying attention. Arthur sat back down and watched her with quiet satisfaction. After breakfast, he said, "Lucas is going to take you shopping for some clothes, and then maybe we can find you a few books for that shelf in your room. Do you like to read?" Leah paused, fork halfway to her mouth. She nodded. "Good," Arthur said. "Father Marcus always said books were the best company a person could have." I think he was right about that. At the mention of Father Marcus, Leah's eyes prickled. Arthur noticed. He reached across the table and patted her hand gently. "He would be proud of you, you know, for what you did, for being brave." Leah looked down at her plate, blinking hard. She wasn't sure she'd been brave. She'd just done what felt right. Over the next few weeks, a new rhythm slowly took shape. Mornings, Arthur drank his coffee on the porch, reading the paper. Leah would sit on the steps with a blanket around her shoulders, watching the mist rise off the lake. Sometimes Arthur would tell her stories about his childhood, about Lucas when he was young, about his late wife, Helen, who'd love to garden. Leah listened, and slowly, tentatively, she began to respond. Not with many words at first, just small sounds of acknowledgement. A whispered yes or no, a quiet thank you. Lucas came home from work every evening, and always asked, "How was your day, Leah?" At first she just nodded or shrugged. But one night she whispered, "Good." Lucas's face lit up like she'd given him a gift. "Yeah?" he said, grinning. "I'm glad." One morning, about 3 weeks after Leah had arrived, Arthur decided to clean up the kitchen himself. Lucas had already left for work. Leah was upstairs, reading a book Lucas had bought her, a worn copy of Charlotte's Web. Arthur hummed to himself as he washed dishes, stacking them on the drying rack. He reached up to put a mug back on the high shelf above the counter. His knee, still weak, still healing, suddenly buckled. "Damn it," he muttered, grabbing for the counter. The mug slipped from his fingers. It hit the tile floor with a loud crash, shattering into pieces. Arthur tried to catch himself, but his knee gave out completely. He went down hard, one knee slamming into the floor, pain shooting up his leg. He gasped, bracing himself against the counter, breathing hard. Upstairs, Leah heard the crash. She dropped her book and ran. By the time she got to the kitchen, Arthur was on the floor, gripping his knee, his face pale and twisted with pain. "Arthur!" The name burst out of her before she could stop it. She dropped to her knees beside him, her small hands fluttering over his arm, his shoulder, not sure where to touch, terrified. "Are you okay?" Her voice was thin and high, shaking. "Are you hurt? Should I call someone?" Arthur looked at her, his eyes wide with surprise, not because he was in pain, but because Leah had spoken. Really spoken. "I'm okay, sweetheart," he managed, his voice rough. "Just my old knee, it's been giving me trouble. You're bleeding." Leah pointed at his palm, where he'd cut it on a shard of the broken mug. "It's just a scratch. I'll get a bandage." Leah scrambled to her feet and ran to the bathroom, remembering where Lucas had shown her the first aid kit. She came back with the whole kit, setting it on the floor beside Arthur, and opened it with trembling hands. "Here," she said, pulling out a bandage. "Let me." Arthur held out his hand, and Leah carefully pressed the bandage over the cut, smoothing it down with gentle fingers. "There," she whispered. Arthur smiled, a real full smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Thank you, Leah." She looked up at him. "You scared me. I'm sorry. Don't do that again." Her voice broke. "I don't want you to get hurt." Arthur reached out and pulled her into a hug, gentle, careful, giving her space to pull away if she wanted. But Leah didn't pull away. She leaned into him, pressing her face against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, she let herself cry. Not sad tears, not scared tears, just tears. Arthur held her, one hand rubbing slow circles on her back, and didn't say anything. He didn't need to. That evening, when Lucas came home, Arthur told him what happened. Lucas stood outside Leah's door for a long time, his hand pressed against the wood. He smiled to himself. "She spoke," he whispered. "She really spoke," and then louder through the door. "Hey Leah, you doing okay in there?" A pause, then muffled but clear. "Yeah, I'm okay." Lucas's smile widened. "Good. Dinner's in 20 minutes, okay. Okay." He walked downstairs, feeling lighter than he had in years. "She's smart," Arthur said one evening, watching Leah read at the kitchen table. "You see how fast she picks things up." Lucas nodded, setting down his coffee mug. "I've been thinking, she should be in school." Arthur frowned. "The public school here is not great, underfunded, overcrowded." "I know," Lucas said. "That's why I contacted Lewis Academy." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "The private school, they have an excellent academic program, small class sizes, and they agreed to offer Leah a full scholarship." Lucas hesitated. "But Dad, it's not going to be easy for her. The kids there come from money. They're not always kind to people who are different." Arthur sighed heavily. "We can't protect her from everything." "I know, we just have to make sure she knows she has a home to come back to." Leah's first day at Lewis Academy was in mid-October when the air was crisp and the leaves crunched underfoot. Lucas drove her. She wore a new uniform, white button-up shirt, navy skirt, matching cardigan, and brand new Mary Jane shoes that squeaked when she walked. She still carried her pillowcase bag, hidden inside her backpack. She couldn't let it go. The school gates were tall, wrought iron, impressive. The lawn was perfectly manicured. The building itself was old brick with white columns, looking more like a small college than an elementary school. Expensive cars lined the circular driveway, BMWs, Mercedes, a Tesla. Kids spilled out, laughing, calling to each other, wearing designer backpacks, and talking about weekend trips to beach houses. Leah stepped out of Lucas's car, gripping the strap of her backpack. Eyes turned toward her immediately, some curious, some dismissive, some assessing. A teacher, Mrs. Carlton, middle-aged with a kind smile, met them at the entrance. "You must be Leah," she said warmly. "Welcome to Lewis Academy. I'll be your homeroom teacher." Leah nodded, not trusting her voice yet. Lucas knelt down. "You're going to do great, okay? And I'll be here to pick you up at 3 p.m. If you need anything before then, Mrs. Carlton has my number." Leah nodded again. Lucas squeezed her shoulder and left. Mrs. Carlton led Leah to a bright classroom with big windows and colorful posters on the walls. 25 kids sat at desks arranged in neat rows. They all looked up when Leah walked in. "Class, this is Leah Harper. She's joining us starting today. Please make her feel welcome." A few kids smiled, a few waved, but in the back corner, two students, a girl with perfectly styled blonde hair and a boy with expensive sneakers, whispered to each other and smirked. Madison Pierce and Grant Sullivan. Leah took the empty desk near the front, trying to make herself small. At lunch, Leah sat alone at the end of a long table, opening the lunchbox. Arthur had packed a turkey sandwich, baby carrots, an apple and a juice box. To her it was a feast. To the kids around her, it was ordinary. Behind her whispers started. "That's the scholarship kid. Yeah. My mom said she used to be like homeless. Seriously, that's so weird. Why would they even let her in here?" Leah kept her eyes on her sandwich, chewing slowly, pretending not to hear. The whispers didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, they multiplied, spreading like cracks in glass. "Her lunch smells weird. Don't stand next to her in photos. She probably has lice or something. Let's not pick her for our group project. She's probably dumb." Leah never cried in front of them. She never responded. She just endured. At home she grew quieter. Arthur and Lucas noticed, but they didn't know how to fix it. One night, Leah sat alone on the porch steps, hugging her pillowcase bag, staring out at the dark lake. Arthur found her there. He didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside her with 2 mugs of hot cocoa and handed her one. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the distant call of a loon on the water. Finally, Leah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "At school, it's like nobody wants me there." Arthur set his mug down and turned to her. "There are 2 kinds of places in the world, Leah. One kind says, you have to be like us to belong here. The other kind says, you're enough exactly as you are." He paused. "That school is the first kind. But this house, this is the second kind." Leah looked at him, her eyes shimmering. "And you know what else?" Arthur continued softly. "The people who matter, the people who are really worth knowing, they'll see you for who you are. Not where you came from. Not what you don't have. Just, you." Leah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "What if nobody ever sees that?" "They will," Arthur said firmly. "I promise you, Leah, they will." The invitation arrived in early December, printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock with embossed gold lettering. "You are cordially invited to Lewis Academy's Winter Gala, an evening of gratitude and connection." At the bottom, in smaller print, "With special thanks to our platinum sponsor, Lucas Whitlock." "A gala?" Leah asked, holding the invitation carefully. "It's basically a fancy party," Lucas explained. "For families and donors, they do it every year." "Do I have to go?" Lucas and Arthur exchanged a look. "You don't have to," Arthur said gently. "But we thought, maybe it would be nice, a chance for people to see you as part of this community." Leah wasn't sure about that, but she nodded anyway. The night of the gala,
The school's event hall had been transformed. White tablecloths, crystal glasses catching the light, arrangements of white roses and evergreen, a string quartet playing softly in the corner, parents in cocktail dresses and suits mingled, sipping wine, exchanging business cards and polite laughter. The children wore their best clothes, designer dresses, little suits with bow ties, patent leather shoes. Leah arrived with Arthur. Lucas would come later. He was meeting with the headmaster first. She wore a simple navy dress that Arthur had bought, with white tights and the Mary Jane shoes from her first day. Her hair was brushed and pulled back with a white headband. She looked nice, but she didn't look like she belonged, and she knew it. Arthur found their table number 12, near the middle of the room, and pulled out a chair for Leah. "I'm going to get us some drinks," he said. "You okay here for a minute?" Leah nodded, even though she wasn't. She sat down, smoothing her dress over her knees, and looked around. At the next table, she recognized some kids from her class. They were laughing, talking, completely comfortable. She was invisible again. A few minutes later, Madison Pierce and Grant Sullivan appeared, dressed like they'd stepped out of a magazine. Madison spotted Leah, and nudged Grant. They walked over. "Oh," Madison said, her voice bright and fake. "You're here." Leah looked up, her stomach tightening. "Yeah," Grant added with a smirk. "Guess the scholarship covers party invitations too." Madison sat down in the chair next to Leah, the one Arthur had been sitting in, and crossed her legs elegantly. "Tonight is supposed to be about thanking families who've done a lot for the school," Madison said, picking at her perfectly manicured nails. "You know, people who've contributed." She looked at Leah with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But you didn't contribute anything. You just take." The words landed like stones in Leah's chest. Grant leaned against the table. "Yeah, I mean this seat," he tapped the back of Leah's chair, "should probably go to someone who actually belongs here, not some charity case." Leah's hands clenched in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. Madison stood up, smoothing her dress. "Maybe you should just go sit somewhere else, somewhere more appropriate." The other kids at the table were watching now. Some looked uncomfortable, some looked away. None of them said anything. Leah's vision blurred. She stood up slowly, carefully pushing her chair back in so it wouldn't make noise. She turned and walked toward the exit, her shoes squeaking softly on the polished floor. She just needed to get to the bathroom. She could hide there until Arthur came back, until Lucas arrived, until this was over. She reached for the door handle, and the door opened from the other side. Lucas Whitlock stepped into the hall, Arthur right behind him. Lucas's eyes scanned the room immediately, searching. They landed on Leah, standing alone by the door, her face pale, her shoulders hunched. His expression darkened. He walked over quickly and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Leah, what's wrong?" Leah shook her head, not trusting her voice. Lucas looked past her toward the table where Madison and Grant stood, suddenly very interested in their phones. He understood immediately. Arthur saw it too. His jaw tightened. At the front of the room, the event coordinator approached the microphone on the small stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention please. We're honored tonight to have Mr. Lucas Whitlock with us, our platinum sponsor for this year's gala. Mr. Whitlock, would you like to say a few words?" The room quieted. Lucas looked down at Leah.
Then he nodded once, his expression unreadable. He walked to the stage, Leah and Arthur following close behind. When he reached the microphone, he adjusted it and looked out over the crowd. Every face was turned toward him. "Good evening," Lucas began, his voice calm and steady. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Polite applause. "This gala is meant to celebrate generosity, to thank the families who've given their time, their money, their support to Lewis Academy." He paused. "But tonight I want to tell you about a different kind of generosity." The room was silent now, attentive. "A few months ago my father collapsed in an alley in Lambert. He was having a heart attack. He was alone in the dark, dying." Lucas's voice didn't waver, but his hands gripped the edges of the podium. "If no one had found him, he wouldn't be here today." Arthur stood near the side of the stage, his eyes fixed on his son. The person who found him, Lucas continued, wasn't a police officer, not a paramedic, not someone wealthy or powerful. He turned his gaze finding Leah standing small and uncertain near Arthur. It was a 6-year-old girl, homeless, hungry, with nothing to her name except a $100 bill, a gift from the only person who'd ever cared for her. Whispers rippled through the crowd. That girl could have used that money for food, for warm clothes, for shelter. But instead, when she saw my father dying in that alley, she used it to save his life. Lucas's voice grew stronger. She ran to the nearest store, gave them everything she had, and begged them to call 911. She didn't know my father. She had no reason to help him. But she did. He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. That girl is Leah Harper. He gestured toward Leah. Every head in the room turned. Leah wanted to disappear, wanted to run. But Arthur's hand was on her shoulder, steady and reassuring. Leah is not a charity case, Lucas said, his voice cutting through the silence. She's not here because we felt sorry for her. She's here because she and my father are family now. He let that word hang in the air. Family. Last month we completed the paperwork. Leah Harper is officially my niece. Arthur Whitlock is her legal guardian. More whispers. Surprised faces. Madison's face had gone pale. So when I stand here tonight, Lucas continued, and I thank people for their generosity, I'm not just talking about money, I'm talking about courage, about sacrifice, about a little girl who gave everything she had to save a stranger. His voice softened. Leah taught us something important. She taught us that belonging isn't about how much money you have or where you come from. It's about character, about kindness, about being willing to help someone even when it costs you everything. He looked directly at the table where Madison and Grant sat. And if anyone in this room, student or parent, makes her feel like she doesn't belong here, then I have to question whether they understand what this school should really stand for. The room was utterly silent. Lucas stepped back from the microphone. Then Arthur stepped forward. He moved slowly, leaning on his cane, but his presence commanded attention. I'm an old man, Arthur said, his voice gravelly but clear. I've lived through wars, I've built businesses and lost them. I've been helped by people I didn't deserve to be helped by. He paused. But I have never, not once in my entire life, been saved by someone who had less than nothing. Someone who gave up their last bit of security for a complete stranger. He turned to look at Leah, and his eyes were wet. Leah, you gave me my life back. You gave me a reason to wake up every morning. You gave my son a family again. His voice broke slightly. You're not a guest in our home, you're not temporary. You're ours, and we're yours. Leah's vision blurred with tears. Arthur held out his hand. Come here, sweetheart. Leah walked to him on shaking legs. Arthur pulled her into a hug, and the room erupted in applause. Not polite applause this time. Real applause. Some parents stood, then more. Then most of the room was standing, clapping. At their table Madison sat frozen, her face red. Grant wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. When the applause finally died down, Lucas took the microphone one last time. One more thing, he said. We're establishing a new scholarship fund in Leah's name. The Harper Scholarship will go to students who've overcome extraordinary challenges, students who might not have money or connections, but who have character. He smiled, because that's what really matters. After the speeches, after the dinner, after the awkward congratulations from people who'd ignored Leah for weeks, Madison approached her. Her perfect composure was cracked. Leah, she said quietly, I'm sorry, I didn't know, I didn't. She stopped, unable to finish. Leah looked at her for a long moment. You didn't know, Leah said softly, because you didn't ask. Madison flinched. Leah turned and walked back to Arthur and Lucas. She didn't need Madison's apology. She had something better. She had a family. The weeks following the gala were different. Not perfect, but different. At school, kids started to look at Leah, really look at her, not just past her. Some approached her with genuine curiosity. Is it true you were homeless? What was it like? Leah didn't always want to talk about it, but sometimes when the question was asked with real interest rather than pity, she'd answer. It was cold, she'd say simply, and lonely, but I survived. Others kept their distance, but the whispers stopped. Madison and Grant avoided her completely, which Leah was fine with. Mrs. Carlton, her teacher, seemed to go out of her way to include Leah in class discussions, praising her thoughtful answers and creative writing. Slowly, very slowly, Leah started to feel less like an outsider. At home life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Arthur taught Leah how to play chess on rainy afternoons. Lucas helped her with homework at the kitchen table after dinner. On weekends they went to the library together, and Leah would come home with a stack of books that she'd read, cover to cover by the following weekend. She started to talk more. Not a lot, she was still quiet by nature, but she'd answer questions with full sentences now. She'd tell Arthur about her day at school. She'd ask Lucas about his work, and sometimes, rarely, but sometimes she'd laugh. The first time Arthur heard her laugh, a real unguarded laugh at something silly Lucas said, he had to leave the room for a minute. When he came back his eyes were red, but he was smiling. One evening in late January, Arthur sat Leah down at the kitchen table. "I want to talk to you about something," he said. Leah's stomach tensed. Talk usually meant something serious. "You're not in trouble," Arthur added quickly, seeing her expression. "It's a good thing, I promise." He pulled out a folder and opened it. "Lucas and I have been thinking. We want to do something to honor what you did, to honor you, and to help other kids who might be in the same situation you were." Leah frowned, confused. "We're opening a center," Arthur continued, "right here in Lambert. A place where kids who don't have homes can come for food, shelter, education, a safe place." He showed her an architect's drawing, a 2-story building with big windows and a welcoming front porch. "We're going to call it the Lambert Light Center," Arthur said, "because you brought light into a very dark moment of my life, and we want to bring that same light to other kids who need it." Leah stared at the drawing, her throat tight. "You did this because of me." "Because of you," Arthur confirmed. "You showed us what real courage looks like. Now we want to make sure other kids get the chances you didn't have." Tears welled up in Leah's eyes. What if, she swallowed hard, what if they're scared? What if they don't trust anyone? Arthur reached over and took her hand. "Then you'll be there to talk to them, because you understand in a way that Lucas and I never could." "Me? You," Arthur said firmly. "When you're ready, when you want to, you can help us show them that it's okay to accept help. That accepting kindness doesn't make you weak." Leah looked down at the drawing again. A place for kids like her. Kids who were invisible, kids who were scared. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll help." The Lambert Light Center opened in early March, on a sunny Saturday that felt more like spring than late winter. The old warehouse on the edge of town had been completely transformed. Inside there were bunk beds with clean sheets and warm blankets, a kitchen that smelled like soup and fresh bread, a classroom with books and computers, a common room with couches and games, and most importantly, people who cared. Arthur and Lucas had hired 3 full-time staff members, including Mrs. Kaplan, the woman who used to clean St. Rena's, who'd known Leah since she was small. "Hello dear," Mrs. Kaplan said, when she saw Leah at the opening. She pulled her into a tight hug. "Look at you, so grown up." Leah hugged her back, smelling the familiar scent of lavender soap. "I'm glad you're here," Leah whispered. "Me too, honey, me too." On opening day about a dozen kids showed up. Some came with a parent or guardian. Some came alone. They ranged in age from maybe 5 to 15. All of them looked wary, guarded, like they'd learned not to trust good things. Leah stood near the door with Arthur watching them file in. One girl, maybe 8 years old with tangled brown hair and a too-big coat, clutched a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. She reminded Leah of herself. The girl caught Leah looking and froze, her eyes wide and defensive. Leah walked over slowly and knelt down. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm Leah." The girl didn't answer. "I like your rabbit," Leah continued. "I have a bear that my grandpa gave me. He's up in my room at home." The girl's grip on the rabbit relaxed slightly. "What's your name?" Leah asked. A long pause, then barely audible, "Emma." "It's nice to meet you, Emma." Leah smiled. "Are you hungry?" Mrs. Kaplan made soup. "It's really good." Emma nodded hesitantly. "Come on," Leah said, standing and holding out her hand. "I'll show you where the kitchen is." Emma stared at Leah's hand for a moment. Then slowly she reached out and took it. As they walked toward the kitchen together, Arthur watched from across the room. Lucas came to stand beside him. "She's going to be okay," Lucas said quietly. Arthur nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "Yeah," he finally managed. "She is." That night back at home, Leah sat on the porch swing,
wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. Arthur came out and sat beside her. "That was a good thing you did today," he said. "With Emma," Leah shrugged. "I just talked to her." "You did more than that," Arthur said. "You showed her that someone sees her. That's everything, Leah." Leah was quiet for a moment. Then Arthur, "Yeah, sweetheart. Thank you." "For what?" "For finding me, for not giving up, for," she trailed off, struggling to find the words, "for making me feel like I matter." Arthur's eyes filled with tears. He put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. "Leah," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you've always mattered. From the very first moment I saw you in that alley. You mattered then, and you matter now, and you always will." Leah leaned her head against his shoulder. "I love you," she whispered. It was the first time she'd said it. Arthur's breath caught. "I love you too, sweetheart," he whispered back. "So much." They sat together in the darkness, listening to the gentle lap of water against the shore, the distant call of a night bird, the quiet sounds of home. And for the first time in her entire life, Leah Harper felt completely, truly safe. Spring came to Lambert slowly, the way it always did. The trees around the lake budded green. The air warmed. Flowers pushed through the soil in Arthur's neglected garden. The town looked different too. The Lambert Light Center had brought something new to Main Street, something that had been missing for a long time. Hope. More kids came through the doors each week. Some stayed for a few days then moved on. Others stayed longer, working with counselors and social workers to find more permanent situations. A few, like Emma, became regulars, showing up after school, doing homework in the common room, eating dinner at the long tables Mrs. Kaplan set up. Leah came by almost every day after school. She'd help younger kids with reading. She'd sit with the quiet ones who reminded her of herself. She'd just be there, because she understood in a way that adults couldn't, what it felt like to be invisible, what it felt like to have nothing, what it felt like when someone finally saw you. On a Saturday in late April, Lucas came home with news. "Dad, Leah, I have something to show you." He spread paperwork across the kitchen table. "The Lambert Light Center has received grant funding from the state," he said, his voice excited, "enough to expand. We can add more beds, hire more staff, offer tutoring programs and mental health services." Arthur picked up one of the documents, reading through his glasses. "That's wonderful. And there's more." Lucas looked at Leah. "The state wants to use our center as a model. They're calling it Harper's Houses in the proposal." Leah blinked. "Harper's House, named after you," Lucas said. "Because you started all of this." "I didn't." "Yes you did," Arthur interrupted gently. "Everything that's happened, the center, the scholarship fund, the attention this town is getting for helping vulnerable kids, it all started with you." With one act of incredible kindness, Leah looked down at her hands. She still wasn't used to this, to mattering. "You know what Father Marcus would say if he were here?" Arthur asked. Leah looked up. "He'd say, 'Emilia, you've done good work.'" Leah's eyes stung with tears. "I wish he could see this," she whispered. "Me too, sweetheart," Arthur said. "Me too." That afternoon the three of them went to St. Raina's Church. They walked to the small cemetery behind the building, where Father Marcus was buried under an old oak tree. The headstone was simple. Father Marcus Doyle 1943 to 2023. He loved well. Leah knelt and placed a bouquet of wildflowers at the base of the stone. "Hi Father Marcus," she said softly. "It's me, Emilia." The breeze rustled the new leaves above them. "I used the money," she continued. "I know you said it was for me, to keep me safe, but I used it to save someone else." She swallowed hard. "I hope that's okay. I hope you're not disappointed." Arthur knelt beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "He's not disappointed," Arthur said. "I promise you that." Leah nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered to the headstone. "For everything, for keeping me safe when no one else would, for teaching me that I matter." She stood up slowly. "I won't forget you," she said. "Never." As they walked back to the car, Lucas put his arm around Leah's shoulders. "You doing okay?" he asked. Leah nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." "Good." They drove home in comfortable silence. When they pulled into the driveway, Leah looked up at the house, at the porch where she sat with Arthur in the mornings, at the window of her room, at the lake sparkling beyond the trees. "This is home," she said quietly. Arthur, getting out of the car, heard her. He smiled. Yes, he said. It is. That evening, Leah sat at her desk in her room, writing in the journal Mrs. Carleton had given her. She wrote about Father Marcus, about the alley, about Arthur and Lucas, about Emma and the other kids at the center, and at the end she wrote, I used to think I was invisible, that I didn't matter, that nobody would ever really see me, but I was wrong. Not because anything about me changed, but because I found people who knew how to look. And now I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure other kids know they're not invisible either. Because everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves a home. She set down her pen and looked around her room at the shelves now full of books, at the photos on the wall, her Arthur and Lucas at the lake, her and Emma at the center, her whole class at school, at the teddy bear sitting on her pillow. Through her window she could see Arthur on the porch, reading his paper. Lucas was in the kitchen, humming while he made dinner. Normal sounds, home sounds, sounds that meant she belonged. Leah smiled, then she closed her journal, went downstairs, and joined her family. 5 years later, Lambert Light Center, now officially called Harper's House, serves over 100 children each month. Leah Harper, now 11, volunteers there every weekend. She still doesn't talk much, but when she does, people listen, because they know her story, and they know that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything, not just for one person, but for an entire community. Arthur Whitlock, now in his late 70s, still sits on his porch every morning, drinking coffee and watching the lake, but he doesn't sit alone anymore. Lucas Whitlock expanded his business, using a portion of the profits to fund similar centers in other towns. And Leah finally has what she'd never had before. A home, a family, and the knowledge that she is seen, valued and loved, exactly as she is.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.